literacy of the 21st century is more than just reading and writing. It really is understanding information and understanding data. If you've ever felt like your phone is listening to you, often it is. You may talk about green rugs, and then all of a sudden you pull up Facebook or Instagram and you scroll down, it's like, whoa, here's an advertisement for a green rug. That data is being transferred real time and then turned into a commercial or an ad for you. With the rise of AI, it's easy to use that for corruption. And so as a society, when we help move everyone towards statistical literacy and data literacy, it forces us to be very objective in our analysis, to take in all different viewpoints and different pieces of information, and it empowers everyone because we can all make our own informed, rational choice instead of depending on the belief of someone else or trusting the belief of someone else because we don't understand the information that's right in front of us. My name is Dr. Talithia Williams, and I am a math professor and a science communicator. So every day we're doing math and working with numbers just to live in society. And so really all of us are statisticians and data scientists and mathematicians. If I want to get a ride to the airport and I do Uber or Lyft, I'm looking at it and I'm interacting and it's telling me a distance and a time and a price. Or exercise data, right? The number of steps that you took per day, or, what was the range of your heart rate today? How much movement did you have? All of these things can not only help us make decisions, but can help our doctor understand when things are going wrong in our system or things are working right. There are so many ways that math and statistics show up in the beauty of nature. The Fibonacci sequence is a wonderful example of how it shows up in the pattern of leaves on a plant, or things like fractals. Fractals are seen in the human body with the way that blood vessels sort of grow and move around and expand. So many of these mathematical concepts that we study and understand have direct occurrences in the world around us in ways that are just beautiful and awe-inspiring. And so part of my excitement is to make those connections and help people see that if they walk outside, there's mathematics right in front of them that they can be really excited about. What's really critical to understand when you analyze data is, first, what does it have the power to tell you and what does it not have the power to tell you? People think a statistical model is the end-all be-all, and it's not. If I wanted to paint a narrative or tell a story that was not true, I could very easily do that, and many people would not know, especially if it feeds an underlying belief, right? Then people will take that story, whether it's true or not, and latch onto it. And so it's almost like being a detective, right? When you give me a set of data, it's my job to uncover what's hidden in it. The first thing I'm looking for is, where was the data collected? Is it a reputable source? Is it accurate? The other thing that I'm often looking for is understanding that correlation does not imply causation. For example, if you mapped the ability to tie shoes relative to age, right, you would see that you tie them much more effectively when you go from 0 to 10 years old. But it's not just because your age is increasing, right? It's because you're becoming nimble with your hands and now you can reach down and tie your shoes. And so I have to be careful that once I uncover those relationships, I understand the true sort of root cause of them. Then I want to know, do I have a representative sample? Often data that we collect is data that has come from society in some way. And so the same biases that we might possess ends up in the data set. We call that confounding variables. And so as a statistician, if there's a bias in the data, it's my job to find it, uncover it, pull it out, and get rid of it. There was a healthcare algorithm that was developed so that if you were to show up and present with symptoms, it would use this historical data to predict what your treatment should be. And it was pretty accurate. It was very good. It didn't take into account patient race, which made the statisticians believe that it was a very unbiased model. Once the model was in practice, they found that it was biased because built into the data was some underlying racist practices in terms of how Black and brown patients showed up and would often get assigned to lesser treatments. The model actually perpetuated that bias And so if we don't uncover those biases, those confounding variables, the correlations that don't imply causations beforehand, we end up implementing it in a model, putting it into a real life situation, but that affects people or outcomes or decisions. And those decisions then have consequences. When you have a sort of a data literate component of society moving in the direction of AI and machine learning, and folks in society who could care less about it, who are more maybe just consumers, we end up with people making decisions for us that we don't understand or we've had very little influence on. Because so many of our daily decisions depend on numbers and math and data, it's important that as society, we are data literate, we're statistically literate, so that we are not only aware of the decisions that are being made on our behalf, but we're a part of them.
Why do we accept our reality as the uncontested truth? You are a data collection machine that moves through the world and you vacuum up your little bits of experience that you have. And in the end, whatever you have, that's what you assume to be true. But our experiences are limited. We're born on a particular spot on the planet and we have a thin little trajectory of experience and we construct what we believe the world is made up of from there. And as a result, we all have a very limited view of what's going on out there. The interesting thing about being a human is that we're stuck inside our internal model. It's all we ever see. But with the endeavor of science and literature and philosophy, what we're able to do is step outside of ourselves and understand, hey, the way that I see the world isn't the only way to see the world. It's not the only truth. And the more we can get good at that, the more we can try to build a better society. My name is David Eagleman. I'm a neuroscientist at Stanford, and I run the podcast Inner Cosmos. The interesting thing about the human brain in particular is that we drop into the world half-baked with a certain set of genetics, and then experience wires up our brains. And what that means is our brains are extremely flexible. So whatever moment in time you're born in, whatever culture you're born in, whatever deities your culture believes in, whoever your parents are, your neighborhood, so on, you absorb all that and that crafts who you become. Now, as a result of the genetics being different, your brain wires up in slightly different ways. My interest in searching out the genetics here is to define a new field called perceptual genomics, which is understanding how slight tweaks in your genome and yours leads to us seeing the world in a different way. In other words, how do the genes that you come to the table with change your perception of reality? For example, how clearly you visualize something on the inside. If I ask you to picture an ant crawling on a red and white tablecloth towards a jar of purple jelly, you might perceive that as a movie in your head, or you might perceive it without any picture at all, but just sort of the concept of it. People have completely different internal lives. Your genetics and life experiences might be different from mine, which makes our models somewhat different from each other, and that's true for all 8 billion of us. So our brains are very predisposed to form in-groups and out-groups. We form the psychological thing of trusting our in-group and caring about our in-group and not so much about the out-group. Presumably this has an evolutionary basis because we grew up in small tribes and you knew who your folks were in your tribe, but that other group across the hill, you have no idea who they are, you don't know if they're enemies. And so we constantly form the groups that we belong to, whether that's predicated on our country or our religion or our favorite sports team. We care more about the people who agree with us, and we're very suspicious of the people who are in the out groups. One of the amazing parts about human brains is our sense of empathy. Well, it turns out that when you're dealing with somebody in your out group, you have less empathy. You just don't care about them as much. In my lab some years ago, we did an experiment where we put people in the brain scanner. They see 6 hands on the screen, and the computer goes around boop, 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 and randomly picks one of the hands, and then the hand either gets touched with a Q-tip or it gets stabbed with a syringe needle. And when it gets stabbed, these networks in your brain that are involved in pain come online. But now what we did is we labeled each hand with a one-word label: Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Scientologist, atheist. And now the question is, does your brain care as much if it's a member of your out-group? And the answer is, your brain does not care as much. If your in-group member gets stabbed, you have a big response in this area, this pain matrix. If an out-group member gets stabbed, you have a smaller response. This is true across all groups that we measured. This isn't an indictment of religion. It's just about who's in your in-group and who's in your out-groups in this case. When you look at any conflict in the world and you have two sides that hate each other, when they're looking at the other side, they don't think of them like a human, like a person. They think of them like an object. And therefore, the medial prefrontal cortex and other areas don't even come online when considering them. So the internal model that you form growing up in your life, that's what determines who's in your in-group and who's in your out-group. And obviously we see what happens once people start traveling and going around the world. They expand their internal model, they expand their in-groups greatly. But it's very easy, if you haven't been to every country in the world, which most of us have not, to still feel like, oh, that group, that culture, whatever, is totally foreign to me. The first step to expanding our narrow models is to recognize that there are fence lines and that there are things we're not seeing. So the first thing is to understand our own biases, because we can't help but have biases. And the question is there something that we can do given that situation? Many people are familiar with the way that orchestras many years ago started having their auditions behind a screen so that they wouldn't be biased, male, female, white, black, whatever. All they're hearing is the music pouring over the screen, and they make their decision about who's the best orchestra player that way. There are many ways that you can blind your biases. The second strategy is learning about the tactics of dehumanization so that you can be more immune to them. For example, there's what's called moral pollution, where you associate members of your outgroup with something repulsive. Whatever's coming out of their mouth now, everyone is a little less eager to hear that because that group has already been smeared. And as we learn about these tactics, we can be immune to them. Once we do that, that gives us the opportunity to build a richer model of the other person. The third strategy is entangling group membership or complexifying your allegiances. If I meet you and I learn that you like surfing and I like surfing and you like this kind of dog and I like that kind of dog, and we find all these things about one another that we have in common, that's the stuff that allows people to bond. And only later something comes out where we realize we have a disagreement. And then I say, wow, that's interesting. I wouldn't have expected that. Tell me about that. Let me understand that a little bit better, because we're already bonded based on other pieces. So this is a way of making sure that we can improve communication across these gaps between each brain and every other brain. It's a way of making sure that we understand that everyone's not experiencing reality the same way on the inside. And what you need are deeper bonds that hold people together so that you understand other people as fellow humans in a way that's more fruitful and beneficial for our future.